Gaslighting. It's an increasingly common term that dates back to a 1938 British play, Gaslight, and subsequent movies focused on the power of manipulation in relationships. In the original play, a manipulative husband makes his wife feel as if she's going insane by telling her that her perceptions are inaccurate when she notices that the house lights dim. In today's world, the term is used to describe manipulative actions that are geared toward making a person doubt their perceptions and sense of reality. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. My current partner and the partner before him constantly gaslight me. Looking back, I realize that this feels so familiar because my mother constantly gaslit me throughout my childhood. What can I do to stop attracting gaslighters into my life? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. Robin Stern, who will be sharing her expertise as the co-founder of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and author of the Gaslight Effect and Gaslight Effect Recovery Guide. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Stern. It is so wonderful to have you here with us today. I know your wisdom is going to give us and so many people just a wealth of information about what gaslighting is and how it erodes our mental health. And before we launch into that topic, can you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Oh, what a lovely question. First, before I do that, please call me Robin. And may I call you Carla Marie or Carla?
You may call me Carla Marie or Carla, whatever you like.
Lovely, lovely. First, I'm so curious about you, but I will try to focus on myself for a moment. What makes me me is, let me think about how I want to answer that. So many things make me me. My love of my children, my love for my husband, my want to heal the world, my feeling that the world could be a much better place if people had skills and wisdom that I hope to be able to impart a little bit of, but so many thoughtful, wise people are out there. And what makes me me is I like to hula hoop.
Ah.
What makes me me is being playful and being serious and working hard to make a difference and spending time with family and cooking. What makes me me is meditating and having mindful moments through my day to balance myself. What makes me me is being open to new ideas and to meeting new people and uh, to being wrong and getting feedback and to thinking a lot and thinking deeply about the things that matter to me. What makes me me is collecting art, particularly new artists. Right now, particularly an artist we saw in Mexico, whose work we saw in Mexico, just fabulous. And we've been collecting his work for a while. I'll stop there. Lots of things make me me.
Wow, just so beautiful. Thank you. We certainly are kindred spirits. So, I also love the piece about having mindful moments throughout the day to rebalance. Just what a rich and lovely sharing. Thank you so much. It's just a lovely way to start because, well, and your answer is so authentic, which sets the stage for gaslighting, which is the opposite of authenticity, just the So we've had the listener's question, and so first question is maybe, could you please tell us what gaslighting is?
So gaslighting is a very serious and insidious, sometimes often covert, uh, form of psychological manipulation, emotional abuse, where the gaslighter seeks to sow seeds of doubt in the target of the gaslighting, who I call the gaslightee, so that they begin to second guess their memories, their perceptions, their ideas, their character, and ultimately their sanity. Quick definition.
Quick and heavy
Yes.
definition.
Yes.
So, little sidetrack here. What got you interested in gaslighting?
Thank you for the question. I was fascinated by the movie, the 1944 movie Gaslight, where Ingrid Bergman played Paula, the loving, adoring wife who was ultimately gaslighted, and Charles Boyer played what's his name now? Gregory, who was the diabolical, malicious, maniacal gaslighter in that movie, trying to drive Paula crazy and trying to make Paula think or lead Paula to think that she was crazy in the effort to drive her crazy. And I couldn't believe watching the movie that this character who was, of course, I could believe anything, it's Hollywood, but I couldn't believe when I translated it to real life that a woman who was so seemingly confident and poised and self-possessed at the beginning of the movie, few minutes into the movie, was already second guessing herself. Of course, what they did in a few moments in the movie sometimes takes weeks and months in real life to go from, that's a silly comment you're making, honey, to maybe he's right. When somebody is telling you something about yourself that initially you think is silly or isn't true, and you just want to, you don't even know why they're saying it, you think it's just a passing comment, and you can just go on from there. And that shift from being confident to being insecure and unmoored and destabilized was really interesting to me, especially because it reflected what I was seeing in my private practice. So I'm a licensed psychoanalyst. I've been a psychotherapist for many years. I don't actually do a psychoanalysis where people lie on the couch and tell me their dreams all day long. But it was my training, meaning that I believe in an unconscious and things being out of your needing to unpack your psychology quite a bit in order to understand and get out of your own way. And I've been seeing a lot of women. I was involved with a wonderful Women's Leadership Institute, and as a result, many people who were referred to my practice were women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, who were suddenly finding themselves in relationships where they felt like, I don't know what's going on, but maybe it's me. And I began to notice that when women would come to my office and they would report that their partners were screaming at them or tragically hitting them, they would have no trouble saying, that guy, he's a bad person. I know he is, I just can't leave yet. But when they came in and they said, I don't know what's going on, I just feel suddenly unsure of myself, and I seem like maybe I'm really paranoid and forgetful, and I don't really recognize myself, everything would get blamed on them. Women would turn their finger to point at themselves.
Oh, what a terrific but yet horrific image that when we see that finger turning to point to, I am the problem, I am crazy, I am losing it. And I really love that you brought up early on the concept of emotional abuse, because in our society, we tend to give more attention to physical abuse. If someone has a black and blue mark or a broken bone, that's abuse, that's real abuse. Yet, as you and I know, and as many of our listeners have experienced, the emotional abuse can be really substantial and as horrific as, and I'm not saying one is worse than the other, but it can certainly be horrific when you're made to think as though you are a bad person, that you should be ashamed of yourself, that you should doubt your reality, that you are nothing.
Yes, yes. And early on, in my research for my book and my writing for my book, which initially came out in 2007, I was interviewing women who were leaders or directors of battered women's shelters in New York City and all over the country. And each one of them said, uh, addressed what you just addressed and said, actually, that the reality, the destabilizing effect of gaslighting and robbing somebody of their reality or insisting that they let go of their reality was worse than the black and blue marks, because the ghost of gaslighting, if you will, that follows people after that's over is very serious. It's so hard to trust again. It's so hard to feel your way into a relationship where somebody says, you know, honey, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. And to think he's telling you the truth rather than he's manipulating you in that moment, if the last relationship has been all about manipulation. And when somebody says to you, for example, honey, you're so sensitive, it's not out of love. Gee, you're so sensitive. I want to care for your feelings. It's an accusation, right? Like, I
Yes.
didn't do anything wrong. I'm not late. You're just too sensitive.
Absolutely, and I have, oh, thank you for bringing that up. I have seen that come up so many times, whether it's somebody saying, "You're too sensitive," or "Don't ask that question," or "Don't when my facts don't match up to what your mind, I've told this story and I've told that story, and you're trying to make sense out of it." Often the victim or the gaslightee simply wants to make stories match, and then they're told they're too curious, or what's their problem, for why can't they just let it go? All of those forms of gaslighting, you are right, are so destabilizing.
I love that you just mentioned that making sense of the world around you can sometimes look like trying to match the pictures, like, or two sets of pictures together, or put the puzzle together from pieces that are supposed to be part of the same puzzle. So he says, I love you, honey, and I'm always thinking about you. And I wish I could be home every night, but I'm working. I really have to work on this project. And then you call your honey at his office every single night when he's not there, when he's not home yet. And he never answers the phone. And you bring it up and you say, I try to reach you at the office. I don't want to intrude, but I needed to reach you about something. And he says, not something empathic or comforting, like, oh my God, I'm sorry I missed your call, or gee, like you must have been worried, or I'm going to do a better job of keeping my phone next to me. He says, why are you so paranoid?
Exactly.
And you think to yourself, if you're the gaslightee, if you've taken the hand of somebody who's inviting you into that tango, you say, well, I don't mean to be paranoid, but I'm just trying to reach you. I'm not really paranoid. When I couldn't reach you last week, I didn't ask you about it. And so you start defending yourself because you don't want your husband to think of you or your partner to think of you as paranoid. And you lose entirely the fact that he never answered the question. He never addressed the fact that he couldn't be reached. He only made it all about you to deflect, to get him off the hot seat.
And such a good point, because as we were saying a bit earlier, it's natural for the human mind to want to have a complete picture. It creates safety, it creates stability, and you probably also see it as I've seen it when somebody's dating. Or it's not necessarily a marriage. It can be during the dating process when the manipulative person tells one story and then another story, and that story doesn't match up. And the individual saying, "Well, I thought you said this." And then the response is, instead of being direct and answering it, the response is, no, you got that wrong, or why are you so curious, or why can't you let that go? And that is one of, I would imagine you're the pro here. It seems like that's one of the gaslighters' main tools, deflecting and yes.
Yes. In fact, some gaslighters learn how to gaslight by happening accidentally or coincidentally into that kind of manipulative strategy because they have to get out of the hot seat. So I'll just take the opportunity to say people aren't born gaslighters. People gaslight and gaslighters are not, it's not a DSM diagnosis. It is not a mental illness. It is a strategy, a behavior. It is something that is socially learned. So where do we learn it? We learn it along the way of growing up. Right. We learn it either from somebody gaslighting you, from you're witnessing gaslighting and thinking, oh, that's a good way to get out of lying or get out of a hot seat. Or, as I said just a minute ago, you happen into it. Like somebody says, you know, I don't understand. You say you love me, but I never hear from you unless I call. And person doesn't want to say, you know what, I don't really feel that way, or, I don't like to make phone calls, or, I don't know. I really don't know, but I'm sorry. Sorry I hurt your feelings, or something else. Gaslighter says, you're so sensitive, baby. You're too sensitive. Or I never told you I would call. What are you talking about? And so then you, the gaslightee, are hooked in if you're going away thinking, I am too sensitive. What's wrong with me?
So I have a couple of questions for you already.
Okay.
Um, and I agree with you on all fronts and the gas. So would you imagine that there's more gaslighting behavior in people who do have something going on the mental health spectrum, such as narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder? Do you tend to see it more as we see a diagnosis like that?
I wouldn't say I tend to see it more. I would say that gaslighting is a favorite strategy of people who would be in the narcissistic personality disorder category.
Got it. And that makes perfect sense. It, as you said, and I loved how you gave the visual of the individual who finds themselves in the hot seat because they don't want to be questioned, because they don't want the other person to have their own reality. That strategy is a very easy one for them to learn and then get hardwired into their brains.
Exactly, and I what I didn't say in my story, because we moved away from it, is that it works. So you're on the hot seat, and all of a sudden, I'm telling you, "You're so sensitive, babe," and you're walking away thinking about that, and I don't have to answer. I don't have to be empathic, which, by the way, I probably don't have very much of that anyway if I'm a chronic gaslighter, and I think, I can do this again. And even if I don't think I can do this again, it worked and I will do this again.
Absolutely. And that's how coping strategies are formed. You see that it works one time, and you also, and I've seen this in people I've worked with where, especially, in couples relationships, where the gaslighter learns that I can avoid diving inward. I can avoid any self-reflection. I can avoid any curiosity, any self-work by just stonewalling this person with gaslighting, just turning it always back to, no, it's about you. You're too curious. You're always asking questions. You're paranoid. You're too sensitive. All of these things that stop healthy communication.
Yes. And uh, many times, the first time somebody will come to see me is with that question. Dr. Stern, my boyfriend says that I'm just too much. I'm too paranoid. I talk about my feelings too much. I'm too demanding. And I don't know. Maybe I am. Like maybe other girlfriends wouldn't be like this. And I don't want to alienate him. And never mind that our attention focused then as the gaslightee, our attention is focused on what's wrong with us. We're trying to figure out you're a gaslighter rather than thinking, do I like this? Do I want this in my life? Is this an okay way for me to feel when I'm dating someone?
Such a good point, and that takes that ability to be reflective rather than reactive. And that's what the gaslighter does. They try to prompt the reactive behavior. And so let's circle back to the listener's question. And this individual, it sounds like at least two romantic relationships have been filled with gaslighting. The individual says, okay, now I'm looking back. I see that I was chronically gaslit as a child. And she's saying that she feels as if, what can she do to stop attracting gaslighters? What do you think about that? What could we offer to her?
Well, in the first place, I'm sorry that whoever you are out there listening, that you went through two difficult relationships where gaslighting was your dynamic or a core dynamic. And certainly sorry that you grew up feeling that that was the way you were related to by your mom. And yes, when you are used to that, then alarm bells don't go off when someone else does it to you, right? So but what I'd offer you is a reframe of your question, because gaslighters are not a particular kind of personality. They come in different personalities. And so it's not that you're necessarily attracting the gaslighter. It's that when the gaslighting happens, you don't go, I want out of here. Or, hey, you know what? Like, I've been in this kind of relationship before where, you do that pivot thing in the middle of a conversation, or suddenly you're blaming me, or you're not taking responsibility, or wait a minute, yes, I'm sensitive, but you still weren't available. So if you think about it as a dance, and in my book, I call it the gaslight tango, your gaslighter is extending a hand and saying, come dance this gaslight tango with me. You're too sensitive, babe. And I take his hand, or you take his hand as the gaslightee, again, for a variety of reasons. As I said, alarm bells don't go off. You uh, are filling out the picture with the hope that this time it will be different. You are filling out the picture with all the other things that you like about him. You're attracted to him. You feel like maybe he's your soulmate. He is easy to talk to. He's very smart, whatever it is that brought you into that relationship to begin with. And so rather than thinking about why am I attracting people, I would ask myself, what can I do to stop the gaslighting as soon as it starts, and see if there's enough else going on that this is a relationship I want to pursue.
Really well put. And I absolutely think it's fantastic how you explained that it's not that this individual is attracting gaslighters. It's not that at all. It's the piece of the alarm bells. When something becomes normal to you from childhood forward, it's like sirens going off in the distance. You're so used to sirens going off all the time because you live in a busy city, and in this case, you're used to get, the alarm bells of the gaslighting, so you become used to it. You become
Yes.
sensitized to it. It doesn't affect you the way it would with someone who didn't constantly, someone on a farm where the alarm
Yes.
bells go off and they go, oh my gosh, fire.
Yes,
And
exactly.
that really can help our listeners understand it's not you.
So I'd like to share a story about someone I worked with many years ago to make this point that I think is so important, and so obvious sometimes when you hear it in another story. So I hope it's helpful to uh, whoever asked the question and to the listeners in general. I worked with a young woman who came in because the gaslighting with her boyfriend, she didn't know it was gaslighting at the time, became really intense, and she wanted to know if she was okay or what was going on. So the story was this. they would walk out to dinner in her neighborhood when they would go out. And she was friendly. And so when people on the street greeted her, she would respond back either by smiling or she would greet them back. And he didn't like it at all. And he told her she was flirting with the people on the street who were smiling at her. And she didn't think she was flirting. And then they argued about that. And then that would often be the end to their ease of well-being that night together. And he finally convinced her that maybe she was inadvertently flirting and she didn't know it. And so he said, I have a solution. When we walk on the street, I want you to look at the sidewalk and not look forward. And she thought that was a little weird, but okay, she started doing it and the fighting stopped. So she thought that was great. At least she was in control and she knew exactly what she had to do to stop the fighting. But then he took the next step. And he told her that when they went out to dinner, that she would always have to take the seat that faced the wall, so that if somebody approached her, that she wouldn't be so accessible to somebody waving at her or smiling and saying, how you doing? And she wouldn't be tempted to flirt, which, just as a reminder, she didn't feel like she was flirting to begin with, but was being accused of it. And something about that, when she was sitting and facing the wall time after time, really begin to get to her. So she came to my office and she told me the story and she said, well, what do you think? And so we started to, of course, I asked her what she thought, and we started to unpack that. And then along the way of the next, let's say the beginning of her therapy, she invited a friend of hers to go out to dinner with them. And they all sat down at the table and or they all approached the table and she said, I'm going to take the seat facing the wall. And her friend said, well, why? It's such a great view. No, let him take the seat facing the wall. And she said, oh, I can't, because then I'll be distracted and I'll be caught up in engaging with other people. And he told me that that's not good for our relationship. And her friend, well, what do you think happened? Her friend looked at her and said, are you crazy? That is completely insane. Who are you? What's happened? And of course, that I need to use the bathroom. You need to come with me. So they had a conversation in the bathroom. And it wasn't until her friend was really alarmed about it that she began to think, wow, I'm glad I'm in therapy. This is really off. So sometimes it does take that pause, step away from the gaslighting, or that third person, or both, to see this is not okay.
Absolutely. And what a beautiful illustration, a very sad one, has a good ending. I am wondering if in your practice, if in your work, you've noticed that gaslighters tend to like to isolate their victims, so to speak, so that they're not getting insight from close friends or close family, the very kind of insight that the person in your illustration got from her friend. Have you noticed that as a pattern?
I have noticed that, and more than that, I've noticed that gaslightees begin to isolate themselves
Mm.
because there's a lot of shame in staying in a gaslight relationship. There's a lot of shame in feeling like I'm a strong woman. What am I doing? I run a company, or I have a high position, or I'm a teacher. I'm teaching young children how to like make friends and have relationships. And I'm in this relationship where I feel like crap all the time, right? And it becomes harder and harder to socialize or to talk about your relationship out loud without realizing that this is really off. And so a lot of women, and I say that because that's the pairing I've seen most often in my practice, women as the gaslightees and men as the gaslighters, women begin to cut off their relationships or limit their relationships or have superficial relationships where there used to be depth. I remember a friend of mine saying to me, promise me that you will scream and yell the first time I say, well, I really don't want to talk about that if I'm with a guy.
What a good friend. What a good friend. And I want to underscore for our listeners what Robin, Dr. Stern just said about the fact that when there is gaslighting or any form of emotional or physical abuse, there is definitely this same theme where the abuser tends to isolate the person very intentionally often, sometimes unconsciously, and then the person who's the victim, in this case, the gaslightee, out of shame, out of embarrassment, they tend to retract more and more. And this is not something that happens just to one strata of the population. It is across all demographics, attorneys, doctors, lawyers, teachers, firefighters, whatever it is. There is certainly this type of dynamic because it is one of the dark parts of humanity that's being brought forward.
And,
Wow.
and I want to add to what I said about the gaslightee isolating themselves, because it is largely about shame and not wanting to socialize your relationship anymore. But sometimes it's also because you're exhausted
Mm,
and or you just don't want to fight again with your gaslighter, who really would rather have you just where he left you so that he can continue his emotional manipulation over time whenever he pleases, without distraction.
thank you. And I notice we're using he and she a lot. And I know our listener is, the one who wrote in, she, and we're talking about, men. When we look at this through a gendered lens, do you tend to see, I certainly see more of the male, as the perpetrator and the female as the victim, which is in line with general, emotional abuse statistics. What do you see in your work?
I've seen the same thing, and it's not just that that's been my referral base, this uh, women referring women because of the expertise and the fact that I'm an author, but also that our culture, even though the glass ceiling is not what it was and we've come a long way, there's still gender dynamics involved in socialization, and women still are coached, if you will, culturally coached to be pleasers, to be empathic, and so often we get stuck in being so empathic. We're in somebody else's shoes so much of the time we forget we even have shoes ourselves to stand in. We forget that we are accommodating to someone else's reality to the extent that we are beginning to give up essential pieces of ourselves. So like in the later stages of gaslighting, where women talk about it being soul destroying, and they really don't even recognize their same strong self because they're not anymore. And it takes a lot of courage at that point and a lot of social support and a lot of mindfulness practice and pausing from gaslighting and surrounding yourself with love and people who care about you to break free and to say, I want to reclaim myself. I want to reclaim my reality. I want to reclaim my joy.
You raised so many good pieces there. And first, the piece about gender with males. I just want to tag on, although it's implicit in what you were saying, that our society tends to really honor and perpetuate male bullying, that male energy that's very top down, that can be very aggressive, very manipulative. And in the business world, it's something that people find wonderful and powerful, and they look up with adoration and admiration to people who are doing this as a business strategy. And so I think for all of us, no matter our gender, to notice if we are doing that instead of really honoring and respecting kindness and goodness and genuineness. Look at, are we admiring people who are perpetuating strategies that are really harmful to all of us in and out of intimate relationships? So thank you for bringing that forward. And I also want just to touch for a moment. So now let's talk about healing. And you have this beautiful strategy with the acronym RULER. Could you tell us a little bit about what ruler means?
It's so wonderful that you're bringing my two worlds together because when I wrote Gaslight Effect for the first time, I was not working at Yale and I was working in the area of emotional intelligence, but I didn't know about ruler yet. And it wasn't until I got to Yale, having met Mark Brackett at an emotional intelligence conference, that I became involved in the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, became involved in co-creating the ruler approach, and then in co-founding the center that we have. Because when I got involved, it was a laboratory that had been, that would belong to Peter Salovey, who is now the president of Yale, about to step down. So that has its own history. But yes, you're right that in healing from gaslighting, you need to have emotional intelligence. You need to be able to name your feelings and to honor your feelings. It's not enough to just let them float by like you might in some of your meditations, or we might in some of our meditations. Just don't attach to anything. In this case, in healing, yes, you need those meditations. And also you need to be able to say, I am consistently feeling discouraged or critical of myself, and I need to shift it, right? Being aware of what you're feeling, being aware of the emotions and the thoughts attached to those emotions is the first step in saying maybe there is something wrong, right? And then going about identifying gaslighting, being able to, in a conversation, whether you write it down or you remember it clearly, sort out the truth from the distortion, sort out the conversation from the twists in the conversation, like we talked about a few minutes ago, asking a direct question and then not getting an answer, but getting a pivot to talk about me, or you, whoever the gaslightee is. Being able to surround yourself with, in my book, I call them your flight attendants, the people who you look to say, is everything okay here? Right? And so those are often your trusted friends or your family. Sometimes it's the way you feel in your body. Are you having stomach aches? Are you having headaches persistently? Are you feeling like just a general sense of melancholy and malaise? And are you unable to sleep? Or are you not eating in a healthful way? Those are all signs that maybe something's off. That doesn't mean gaslighting is going on, but when you combine those signs with other red flags of gaslighting, like you're second guessing yourself, etc., then you need skills, not just knowledge to break free, the skills of emotional intelligence. So they are recognizing your emotions, understanding what's causing them. Like, okay, I feel really crazy right now, or I feel really confused right now. I just came out of a conversation with my date, and I thought we were going to have a conversation about staying in touch, but instead we're having a conversation about my paranoia. Like I'm confused by that. So understanding what's causing your emotions, labeling your emotions. I'm confused. I feel uncertain. I feel anxious. When you label something, when you name something, then you can begin to tame it, say, at the Yale Center. So it's really about being granular with your feelings. Better to say to yourself, I am frustrated, than I'm upset. Because if you're frustrated, then you know that you're coming up, there's a block, something blocking you from meeting your goal, and you can address that. If you're upset, what do? You can meditate, but you still may be upset, right? So you can bring down your arousal, but unless you're granular in saying your feelings, you won't be addressing that specific psychological theme underlying your feelings. And so in ruler, the R, recognizing, the U, understanding, the L, labeling, is part of the experiencing part of, or is the experiencing part of emotional intelligence. The action part is expressing, your emotion at the right time, to the right degree, to the right person in the right way, so that you can have your voice heard and so that you're in control of your message and the person is hearing something other than the feeling, hearing the communication. And then one of the hardest and most important skills, regulating your emotions and co-regulating with others. So one of the things that I've noticed in gaslighting, oh, I should pause at the end of ruler. So that's the ruler approach, and it's about recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating for yourself and for other people as well. And in addition to the skills of emotional intelligence, what ruler and our work in emotional intelligence offers is a shifted mindset, or invites in a shifted mindset that emotions matter, that emotions are information and data. There's no such thing as a bad emotion. Emotions are contagious. Emotions are social. Everything we do impacts other people around us, even if we're not aware of it. And importantly, that emotional intelligence and the science of emotions and the skills of emotions can be taught and learned at any age.
Robin, so brilliantly said, just so perfectly said. And I absolutely agree with you and want to emphasize for our listeners that when we're looking at emotions, you said there's no such thing as a bad emotion. I agree. I hear even other mental health professionals call anger a negative emotion. Some emotions are positive, some are negative. And I think I was brought up in that world and sometimes have to remember, no, anger's not a bad emotion. It is not a negative emotion. And so listeners, every emotion that you experience is a good messenger. That's what it is. That's what Dr. Stern is reminding us, that your emotions are signals that something needs attention. That's it.
Yes. And importantly, in a relationship, when you feel like something is wrong, it is wrong. You may
Yes.
not yet know what it is, but the answer is not that there's something wrong with you for thinking something's wrong.
Absolutely. And I think one of the common things that happens is someone will be, say, in conversation with the partner. Let's put, gaslighting aside for a minute, just sort of anything. And maybe one or both partners has experienced emotional abuse as a child or physical abuse. And a partner might say, what you're saying is making me feel anxious. If you're being gaslit, yes, that anxiety is signaling. But if the person who's gaslighting you is saying, I'm feeling anxious, it may have something to do with their unresolved childhood issues because they're not wanting to dive in and look at what are my old issues that are causing me anxiety. And I think that's such an important dynamic and something that gaslighters often use. They'll say, well, you're not paying attention and what you're doing is making me feel anxious. And so it's important to be aware and that's, I think, why the ruler approach is so valuable because it's asking, all of us to be able to go through those steps to listen to really what is that emotion telling us.
Yes. And what are we picking up in someone else? So importantly, you can never really know what another person's feeling unless you ask them. And hopefully they know. If they don't know, then you're both on a hunt. But you can't assume that someone is sad because they're yelling, because they're crying. They may be frustrated, and that's the only way they've learned to express it. Or somebody is slamming the door and you may think they're angry, but really it's a little kid who's really sad and frustrated instead, right? So when you're getting a signal from someone else that something is wrong, pay attention. It is wrong, but don't assume that you know what it is. Be the curious emotion scientist and ask questions. And maybe your partner won't know those answers, but then at least you can ask it together.
Yes, and start a dialogue because
Yes.
that's where healing begins. And I could talk to you for another 20 hours or more. So let's begin to wrap up with
Yes.
one piece about maybe emotional support. And for people who can't access psychotherapy
Mhm.
with, one provider, I know that support groups, domestic violence support groups, are a really wonderful alternative. Your books for people who are being gaslit. Could you tell us a little bit about how somebody can access your books and find healing through them?
So first, I would recommend another resource, which is called the How We Feel app. It's an app that I'm proud to say that I've been involved in building with my colleagues, Mark Brackett and Zorana Pringle from the Center for Emotional Intelligence, along with Ben Silberman and his team, Ben Silberman of Pinterest, and his team of amazing designers and technology experts. So it's again called How We Feel. It's free in perpetuity on the Apple, on the iPhone, and on Android. And it is a emotional intelligence learning destination. You can build your vocabulary, you can check in with your emotions, you can find strategies in the toolbar, in the tool part of the app. Sorry that I lost my words there. But there you can find a way to connect to other people who are also using the app and let them know how you're feeling. So maybe you can reach out for that support, or you can support someone else. I think going through a gaslighting relationship, just being there itself is so painful, whether you recognize it or not. And certainly when you recognize it, marshaling your support and your resources so that you can either limit it or leave it if you can leave and you need to leave. So important. So reading books, taking a workshop if you can get it. There must be free workshops. I haven't looked for them online, but I'm sure there are. And I know there are other people who write about gaslighting, and I can get those resources for you, and so that you can put them on your website along with this podcast. And using the How We Feel app, where you can learn about your emotions. You can learn lessons in emotional intelligence and the ruler approach. You can learn the strategies to address those emotions when you have them.
Such tremendous resources. I will be sure to share them in the show notes. Your app sounds phenomenal and a tremendous resource for our listeners and people around the world. So we'll get the word out there. Um,
It really is.
oh my
Here it is.
goodness.
So it looks like this. Oops. I'm just going to show you. So
Please.
that little heart, wherever it is. Oh, there it is. I think. No. I'll click it and it'll come up really quickly. No,
How
it
are
didn't.
you feeling this afternoon? It
Yes.
asked.
Right.
That's
So
tremendous.
yes, and then you check in and you get to say, you'll have hundreds of words to choose from ultimately, and we're still building our words there. But to give you a visual, you'll get to choose where on the mood meter
Mm,
you might lie. And so it will describe, are you having high energy and unpleasant feelings, or low energy and unpleasant feelings? Note that there are no negative feelings. There are
mhm.
unpleasant feelings, but there are no negative feelings. And then if you, like right now, I'm in the yellow quadrant where I have all of these feelings to choose from eager to successful to exhilarated to excited to energized and curious, and the same numbers of feelings in each quadrant. I could go on about it. It's really a fantastic resource to build emotional intelligence, to honor your emotions, and to be granular in expressing your emotions and regulating them.
And that's fantastic because for many of us, we learned, particularly for females, it's okay to be okay and happy and sometimes a little sad. And, men are raised to believe it's okay to be angry and okay. And so taking it from this foundational approach where we learn there are lots of, other feelings out there. And it's like going into, a buffet where you learn, oh my goodness, it's just not porridge. It's all sorts of things that I get to choose from in the feeling, in the emotional world. And what a great way to begin to make friends with everything that's inside of us.
I
Oh,
love that. That's a beautiful way to put it. Thank you. That's a beautiful way.
well,
Yeah.
thank you, Robin, Dr. Stern. You are such a force in the mental health community. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. Thank you for all the attention that you've given to the listener's question to help all of us build our awareness about what's healthy, what's unhealthy, and what gaslighting is and how to recover from it. Whew.
Well, thank you so much. And I will invite you right now to come on my podcast, and we'll be in touch with you, because I would love to have you on my podcast and hear your story and hear about all the incredible work that you've done, not just by reading your books, but by seeing you and being with you in person. I'd love that. I hope you'll say yes.
Oh, I will absolutely say yes. And please, for our listeners, the name of your podcast so they can readily find you.
The Gaslight Effect Podcast.
There we have it. Thanks again. It has been such a joy and a privilege sharing time
Thank
with
you,
you.
Dr. Carla Marie. I'm just loving this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stern, and to our listeners, thank you. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.